The morning light filtered through the kitchen blinds in golden strips, painting our breakfast table in a warmth that felt cruelly ironic. I watched Sarah hum while scrambling eggs, her movements light and carefree, and I maintained the smile I'd perfected over the past 3 weeks. 3 weeks since I'd found the pregnancy test hidden in the bathroom drawer. 3 weeks since I'd recovered the deleted messages from the cloud backup. 3 weeks since my world had shattered and reformed into something cold and crystalline. "You're in a good mood," she said, glancing over her shoulder with that smile that used to make my heart race. Now it just made me tired. "What's the secret?" I took a sip of coffee, letting the bitter taste ground me in the moment. This was it, the line I'd rehearsed 100 times in my head during sleepless nights. "Found out you're expecting," I said, keeping my voice level and pleasant. But not mine. The spatula clattered against the pan. The eggs began to burn, smoke curling upward, but neither of us moved. Sarah's face cycled through confusion, shock, denial, and then fear in the span of 3 heartbeats. Her hand instinctively moved to her stomach, still flat beneath her silk robe. "Michael," she started, but I held up my hand. "I know everything." "Sarah, the positive test you hid behind the tampons, clever touch, by the way. The messages with him. The hotel receipts from business trips that coincided with days I was out of town. The dates, times, everything." My voice remained steady, almost clinical. That was the key. I'd learned that emotion would only give her ammunition, something to twist and use. She stumbled backward against the counter, her face draining of color. "How long have you known?" "Does it matter?" I stood, leaving my coffee untouched. "I've already contacted a divorce attorney. Papers will be served next week. I've documented everything. Yes, including paternity concerns. My lawyer assures me we have a strong case." "Michael, please." Her voice cracked, tears already forming. Once upon a time, those tears would have broken me. I'd have rushed to comfort her, to fix whatever was wrong. But that man had died 3 weeks ago in a bathroom at midnight, staring at a pregnancy test that couldn't possibly be his. We'd stopped being intimate 6 months ago. She'd claimed stress, hormones, tiredness. I'd believed her because I'd loved her. "I'm not angry," I said, and it was true. The anger had burned through me in those first days, leaving only ash and clarity. "I'm just done." "There's a difference. It was a mistake. A moment of weakness. Michael, we can work through this. Counseling, therapy, whatever you need. You're pregnant with another man's child, Sarah. That's not a moment. That's a consequence." I picked up my briefcase from the chair. "I'm staying at the Marriott downtown. Everything you need to know is in the email I sent you this morning. Don't delete it this time." Her sob followed me to the door, raw and desperate. "Michael, please. Don't do this. I love you." I paused at the threshold, my hand on the doorknob. For a moment, just a moment, I felt the weight of 6 years together. The wedding where she'd cried during her vows. The house we'd painted together, arguing cheerfully about whether the living room should be eggshell or cream. The plans we'd made for children of our own someday. But those memories belonged to a different man, married to a different woman. Neither of them existed anymore. "That's the sad part," I said without turning around. "I actually believe you. You probably do love me, in whatever way you're capable of loving. It's just not enough to build a life on. It never was." The door closed behind me with a soft click, not a slam. There was something final about that quiet sound, like the last page of a book turning. Behind me, I heard her collapse, her wails muffled through the wood and brick. I stood on the porch for a moment, breathing in the September air, and realized I felt lighter than I had in months. The performance was over. The truth was out. Now came the hard part. Building a life from the ruins. The Marriott became my sanctuary, a sterile cocoon where everything smelled of industrial cleaning products and nothing reminded me of her. I checked into a suite on the 12th floor with a view of the city I'd lived in my entire life. A city that now felt foreign, as if the revelation of Sarah's betrayal had rewritten the geography of my existence. My phone buzzed incessantly. Texts, calls, voicemails, all from Sarah. I'd read the first few messages, watching her cycle through the stages of grief in real time. Denial. "This is a misunderstanding." Bargaining. "Please just come home and we'll talk." Anger. "You're throwing away everything over one mistake." Depression. "I can't live without you." And back to bargaining. "The baby. We can work this out." I blocked her number after the 15th voicemail. My lawyer, Patricia Chen, had advised me to save everything but not to engage. "Let her hang herself with her own rope," Patricia had said during our initial consultation, her sharp eyes assessing the documentation I'd brought. "This is one of the cleaner infidelity cases I've seen. You did your homework. Homework. Such a mundane word for the excavation of your life's foundation. I'd spent those 3 weeks becoming a forensic analyst of my own marriage. Every credit card statement scrutinized. Every timeline reconstructed. I'd even hired a private investigator, a woman named Torres who'd confirmed what I already knew with such clinical efficiency it made my head spin. His name was David Reston. He worked with Sarah at the marketing firm downtown. 32, divorced, no kids. The affair had started 8 months ago at a company retreat in the Poconos, right around the time Sarah had started working late, coming home smelling of wine and making excuses. The hotel receipts told the story. Monthly trysts at mid-range hotels, always charged to his card. Always on days when I was supposedly at conferences or visiting my mother in Florida. The pregnancy was the ultimate cliché. The condom broke, or maybe they'd gotten careless. Torres had even captured a photo of them together at a cafe 2 days after I'd found the test. Sarah's hand on his across the table, their faces close in intimate conversation. Looking at that photo hadn't hurt the way I'd expected. It had simply confirmed that the woman I'd married had become a stranger long before I'd realized it. What surprised me was Sarah's family's reaction. Her mother, Linda, had somehow gotten the hotel's number and called my room directly on the 3rd day. "Michael, please reconsider," she'd said, her voice carrying that manipulative sweetness she'd perfected over decades. "Everyone makes mistakes. Marriage is about forgiveness. Did Tom forgive you when you had your affair 20 years ago?" I'd asked quietly. The silence on the other end had been profound. Sarah told me about it during one of our late-night talks when we were dating. She said she'd never do what you did, never hurt someone she loved that way. I guess the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Linda had hung up. Sarah's father, Tom, called an hour later. A man of few words made fewer by disappointment. "You're making the right choice, son," was all he'd said. "Don't let them wear you down." Then he'd hung up too, and I'd felt an unexpected kinship with a man I'd never particularly liked. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into the architectural project I'd been leading, a community center for a struggling neighborhood. My partner James noticed the change immediately. "You're here at 6 a.m. now?" he'd said, finding me at my drafting table with cold coffee and bloodshot eyes. "What's going on?" I'd told him everything. James had been my friend for 15 years since graduate school, and he'd always been honest to the point of bluntness. I'd expected anger on my behalf, righteous indignation. Instead, he just nodded slowly. "I never liked her," he'd said finally. "Rachel didn't either. There was always something performed about Sarah, like she was playing a role." He'd squeezed my shoulder. "You're going to be okay. It'll hurt like hell first, but you're going to be okay." The papers were served on a Tuesday. Torres confirmed that Sarah had been home alone, that she'd opened the door expecting a delivery and instead received the divorce petition. She'd called my office 17 times that day. I'd had my assistant Margaret field them all. "She's not well," Margaret had reported carefully. "She's saying she'll do anything. That she'll terminate the pregnancy. That David means nothing. Tell her the attorney will handle all communication going forward," I'd said, not looking up from the blueprint spread across my desk. That night, Sarah appeared in the Marriott lobby. Security called my room to warn me, and I'd watched from the 12th floor as she stood on the sidewalk below, looking up at the building as if she could sense which window was mine. She'd stayed for 2 hours before the security guard, following my instructions, had gently but firmly asked her to leave. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Her, obviously from a different device. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please, Michael. I can't do this without you. The baby, our baby. We can make this work. I'll do anything, our baby." The audacity of the lie, even now, even after everything. I typed back just 4 words. "It's not mine. Sarah." Then I blocked that number too and sat in the dark, watching the city lights blur through tears I'd been holding back for weeks. I'd been so strong, so controlled, so perfectly detached. But alone in that hotel room, I finally let myself break. The next morning, I woke up with clarity. The grief would come in waves, I understood that now. But beneath it was something solid. The knowledge that I'd done the right thing, That staying would have been the death of whatever self-respect I had left. Patricia called that afternoon. She's not contesting the divorce. Her attorney reached out. She's willing to sign whatever we put in front of her. And David? I asked. According to my sources, he wants nothing to do with the baby. Told her to handle it herself. Patricia's voice carried a note of disgust. You dodged a bullet, Michael. 2 of them, actually. I hung up and stared at the ceiling, processing the information. Sarah was alone, pregnant, abandoned by both the man she'd married and the man she'd betrayed me with. Part of me, the part that had loved her, felt a twinge of sympathy. But mostly, I just felt relieved that it wasn't my problem anymore. 3 months passed like watching a film on fast forward. Days blurred into weeks. Seasons shifted, and somehow I kept breathing. The divorce progressed with remarkable efficiency. Sarah had signed everything without contest, perhaps realizing that fighting would only expose more of her deception. Or perhaps David's abandonment had broken something in her that even her betrayal of me hadn't touched. I'd moved into a loft apartment in the Arts District, all exposed brick and high ceilings. Nothing like the suburban house we'd shared. The space felt honest somehow, raw and unfinished, which matched my internal landscape perfectly. James and his wife Rachel had helped me move, quietly efficient, not pushing me to talk, but present enough that I knew I wasn't alone. You're looking better, Rachel had said one evening when they'd brought over Thai food and insisted I eat. Still too thin, but your eyes don't have that haunted look anymore. She was right. The initial shock had worn away, leaving something harder beneath. I'd started running again, something I'd abandoned during the marriage. 5 miles every morning before work, pounding pavement until my legs burned and my mind quieted. I'd also started therapy. Dr. Morrison, a woman in her 60s who didn't let me hide behind clinical detachment. You're intellectualizing your grief, she'd said during our 4th session. Understanding what happened doesn't mean you've processed how it made you feel. I feel betrayed, angry, relieved. Sometimes all at once, I'd replied. And sad? She'd prompted. I'd looked away. Yeah, sad for what I thought we had, sad that it was never real. The divorce was finalized on a gray December morning. I sat in Patricia's office while she walked me through the final papers, her voice professional but kind. Sarah hadn't appeared, her attorney had handled everything remotely. I signed my name on the last page and felt nothing except perhaps a whisper of finality. You're a free man, Patricia said, sliding the documents into a folder. She retained the house, you got your investments and your business. Clean split, all things considered. Any mention of the baby? I asked, though I wasn't sure why I cared. She's due in March. No paternity claim filed against you. She knows that won't fly with the timeline. Rumor has it David's family pressured him into taking some responsibility. But that's just gossip. Patricia leaned back in her chair. My advice? Don't look back. You've handled this with remarkable grace. Most people in your situation would have made it much messier. But not looking back proved harder than I'd anticipated. The holidays arrived, and with them, memories of Christmases passed. Sarah and I had always hosted, our home filled with friends and family, her laugh carrying over the music. This year I spent Christmas Day volunteering at a soup kitchen, serving meals to people whose problems made mine feel absurdly privileged. First time volunteering? Asked an older woman named Jean who worked the line beside me. That obvious? You've got that look, like you're running from something. She smiled gently. We get a lot of that around the holidays. Broken hearts, broken families. Sometimes helping others is the only way to remember you're still alive. She was right. There was something grounding about the work, about the simple transaction of serving food and receiving gratitude. One man, probably in his 50s with weathered hands and kind eyes, had looked at me after I'd filled his plate and said, "Whatever you're going through, son, you're going to be okay. I can see it in you." I'd nearly broken down right there in the serving line. January brought new projects at work and a rhythm to my days that felt sustainable. I'd stopped checking Sarah's social media, something I'd done obsessively in the first month. Watching her posts shift from couple photos of us, all deleted after the first week, to artsy shots of coffee cups and sunsets with vague captions about new beginnings and finding myself. The last post I'd seen before, blocking her entirely, was a silhouette photo of her, pregnant belly with the caption, "Every ending is a new beginning." The comments had been interesting. Friends who didn't know the full story offering congratulations, others notably silent. Her best friend Melissa had actually reached out to me apologizing. I didn't know until after she'd written, "If I had, I would have told you. Sarah's always been good at compartmentalizing. I'm sorry you got hurt." I'd appreciated that more than I'd expected. It was a Tuesday in late February when my phone rang with an unknown number. I'd gotten better about not answering those, but something made me pick up. "Michael?" Sarah's voice, small and uncertain, barely recognizable. My heart rate spiked, adrenaline flooding my system. "How did you get this number?" "Please don't hang up." I needed to hear your voice." She sounded exhausted, wrung out. "The baby's coming early, complications, I'm in the hospital and I'm scared and I know I have no right to call you, but—" "Sarah, stop." My voice was firm, but not cruel. "I'm not the person you call anymore. Where's David?" He left town. New job in Seattle. His family paid me off to keep quiet about paternity." A bitter laugh. $30,000. Like that makes up for anything. I closed my eyes, standing in the middle of my loft, trying to find compassion and coming up empty. "I'm sorry you're going through this. I genuinely am, but I can't be your support system. You need to call your mother or Melissa or— They're all here, but they're not you." Her voice broke. "You were always the one who made everything okay, and I destroyed that. I know I did. I just wanted to tell you that I'm sorry, that I know what I lost, that if I could go back—" "But you can't," I said quietly. "None of us can. Sarah, I hope your delivery goes well. I hope you and the baby are healthy. But this needs to be the last time we speak. Michael, goodbye." "Sarah." I hung up and turned off my phone, sitting in the gathering darkness of my apartment, feeling the weight of that final severance. Dr. Morrison had warned me about this. The moment when the person who hurt you shows vulnerability, and every instinct screams to help because that's who you are. That's who you've always been. But helping them isn't helping you, she'd said. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for both of you is maintain the boundary. That night, I dreamed of the baby for the first time. A faceless infant crying in an empty room, and me standing in the doorway, unable to enter. I woke up at 3 a.m., heart pounding, and knew I'd made the right choice, but God, it still hurt. March arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of false spring that makes you believe winter might actually end. I'd settled into my new life with something resembling peace. Not happiness exactly, but a quiet contentment built on routine and slowly rebuilding trust in my own judgment. Work was going well. The community center project was nearly complete, and I'd been approached about designing a sustainable housing complex for a nonprofit. "You're doing good work," James had said, reviewing the latest plans. Meaningful work. That matters. It did matter. More than the corporate projects Sarah had always pushed me toward. The high-rise condos and luxury developments that paid well, but left me empty. This divorce had cost me a marriage, but it had returned something I'd forgotten. My purpose. Then the photos arrived. It was a Thursday evening. I just returned from a run, still catching my breath, when I saw the notification. An email from an address I didn't recognize, no subject line. My finger hovered over delete, but curiosity, that dangerous human impulse, made me click. The email contained no text, just 6 photographs. The first showed a hospital room, sterile and softly lit. The second was Sarah, pale and exhausted, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blue. The third was a close-up of the baby's face, impossibly small, eyes closed, a shock of dark hair. The fourth showed Sarah crying, the baby at her breast. The fifth was the baby's hand wrapped around what must have been Sarah's finger. The sixth was a birth certificate, the name William Michael Reston clearly visible. Father listed as David Reston, mother Sarah Reston. She'd taken his name. When? Why? Below the photos, finally, text, "He's here. He's beautiful. He's everything I don't deserve. I named him William after your grandfather because even though he's not yours, you were supposed to be his father. You were supposed to be here. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't expect you to respond. I just needed you to know he exists. That part of what we planned came true, even if it all went wrong. I'll love him enough for both of us. I promise." I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. The baby, William, had David's coloring. That much was clear even in newborn haziness. But the shape of his face, the set of his ears, those could have been anyone's. Could have been mine in another life, another timeline where Sarah had made different choices. The rage I thought I'd processed came roaring back. Not the cold, controlled anger I'd wielded like a shield during the divorce, but something hot and primal. How dare she send me this? How dare she use my grandfather's name? A man she'd met exactly twice, a man who'd taught me everything about integrity and honor. How dare she try to insert me into this narrative, make me complicit in her new life? I almost responded. My fingers actually typed out a message. Delete my number. Delete my email. Do not contact me again. That baby is not my concern and you are not my responsibility. Move on. But I didn't send it. Instead, I sat there as the light faded from the windows, as the city buzzed below, as my apartment grew cold and dark around me. I sat there and felt everything I'd been avoiding. The grief for the children we'd planned to have together. The future we'd designed over wine and late-night conversations. I felt the loss of the man I'd been, the one who'd believed in happily ever after and trusted without question. Dr. Morrison's next session was scheduled for the following day, but I called the emergency line she'd given me. She answered on the third ring. Michael, what's happening? I told her about the photos, my voice shaking for the first time in months. When I finished, there was a long pause. What do you want to do? She asked. I want to not care. I want it to not hurt. I want to feel nothing when I look at that baby's face. I laughed bitterly, but I do care. Not about him specifically, he's a stranger, but about what he represents. The life I should have had with Sarah, she pressed, or should have had in general. That stopped me. In general, I admitted. I still want to be a father someday, just not like this. Then don't respond, she said firmly. Sarah is processing her own guilt and grief by trying to include you. That's her journey, not yours. You don't owe her absolution or acknowledgement. You don't owe that baby anything except perhaps the wish that he has a better life than the circumstances of his birth might suggest. So I just don't respond ever? You do what serves your healing, Michael, not her comfort. After we hung up, I looked at the photos one more time, really looked, letting myself feel whatever came up. Sadness, yes. Anger, definitely. But also something unexpected, pity. Not for myself, but for Sarah. She was 29 years old, alone with a newborn, abandoned by her affair partner, estranged from the husband who would have actually stayed, who would have been a real father. The baby, William, was innocent in all this. He'd done nothing wrong except have the misfortune to be born from betrayal. He deserved a mother who could be fully present, not one consumed by guilt and regret. I closed the email without responding and moved it to a folder labeled Archive. Not deleted. That felt too aggressive, too emotional. Just archived, preserved but not engaged with. The next weeks tested that resolve. More emails came, not many, maybe one every few days. Photos of William sleeping, William in a swing, William's first smile. Probably just gas, but maternal interpretation said otherwise. Sarah's captions grew shorter, less apologetic, more matter-of-fact. He grabbed his foot today. First pediatrician appointment went well. Mom moved in to help. I didn't respond to any of them. Each time one arrived, I felt the pull, the old instinct to engage, to comfort, to fix. But I also felt something stronger, self-preservation. This wasn't my family. This wasn't my story. Engaging would only blur boundaries that needed to stay clear. James noticed my preoccupation. She's still contacting you? Photos. Of the baby. I showed him one on my phone. William in a blue onesie, one tiny fist in his mouth. Cute kid, James said neutrally. You know it's manipulation, right? Conscious or not, she's trying to keep you emotionally invested. I know. So why haven't you blocked her? That was the question. I'd blocked her number, her social media, everything, except email. Some part of me must have left that door open deliberately. But why? I think, I said slowly, I need to know they're okay. Not because I want back in, but because I need to know that all this damage led to something good for someone, that the baby is healthy and she's managing, that it wasn't all just destruction. James considered this. Okay, but set a limit. 1 month, 3 months, whatever. Then you close this door completely. Otherwise, you're never going to move forward. He was right, of course. That night, I drafted an email. It took 2 hours and 7 revisions. Sarah, I've received your photos. William appears healthy, and I'm glad your mother is helping you. However, I need you to understand, this contact is not healthy for either of us. I'm not his father. I'm not your co-parent. I'm not your friend. I'm someone trying to heal from a profound betrayal, and these emails prevent that healing. I wish you and William well, genuinely, but after this message I will be blocking your email address. Please respect this boundary, and do not attempt further contact through any means. I hope you find peace and happiness in your new role as a mother. Build a good life for him, he deserves that. But build it without me in it. Goodbye, Sarah. Michael. My cursor hovered over send for 10 minutes. This felt more final than the divorce papers somehow. This was the last word, the closing sentence. After this, there would be no way for her to reach me. No avenue left open. I sent it. Then I blocked her email address. Added a filter to automatically delete anything from similar addresses, and closed my laptop. The silence that followed was profound. 6 months later, I stood in the completed community center, watching children play basketball on the court I'd designed to maximize natural light and acoustic quality. Their laughter echoed off the walls, pure and uncomplicated, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in over a year, unambiguous joy. "It's beautiful," said Marcus, the nonprofit director who'd commissioned the project. "You really listened to what the community needed. Not many architects do that." I shook his hand, accepting the gratitude but also recognizing that this project had given me as much as I'd given it. It had been a lifeline during the darkest months, a reminder that I could still create something meaningful, something lasting. The betrayal no longer defined me. It had happened, it had broken something, but I'd used the pieces to build something new. Not better or worse, just different. Dating had been interesting. Rachel had set me up with her colleague, Emma, 4 months after the divorce was finalized. She's smart, funny, and has her own baggage, so she'll understand. Rachel had promised. Emma and I had met for coffee on a Saturday morning. She was indeed smart and funny, with warm eyes and an easy laugh. We talked for 3 hours, eventually moving to lunch, then a walk through the park. At the end, she'd said, "This was nice, but you're not ready, are you?" I'd appreciated her directness. "How did you know?" "Because I wasn't ready when I started dating again either. You're still processing, still figuring out who you are without her." She'd squeezed my hand. "There's no shame in that. But you should probably do that work before trying to be with someone new." She'd been right. Dr. Morrison had said the same thing in different words. Healing isn't linear. Some days you'll feel whole. Others you'll feel like you're back at the beginning. That's normal. I'd thrown myself into the things I'd neglected during my marriage, reconnected with college friends, started playing guitar again, badly, but with enthusiasm, took a ceramics class where my bowls were consistently lopsided, but the act of creating something with my hands felt meditative, traveled to Iceland on a solo trip, hiking glaciers and watching the northern lights dance across impossibly dark skies, feeling small in the best possible way. My apartment filled with evidence of this new life. Concert tickets taped to the fridge, terrible pottery on the shelves, photographs from my travels on the walls. None of it matched. None of it was curated for aesthetic coherence, but all of it was authentically mine. I thought about Sarah sometimes, but the thoughts had lost their sharp edges. I wondered if William was walking now, talking, becoming a person. I wondered if she'd found happiness or at least contentment. But these were distant wonderings, like thinking about characters in a book I'd finished reading. The anger had faded to something more philosophical, an understanding that people are complicated, that sometimes they make choices that destroy everything, and that doesn't necessarily make them monsters, just human and flawed and sometimes catastrophically selfish. One evening in late September, almost 2 years after finding that pregnancy test, I was at a fundraiser for the nonprofit when I met Claire. She was a social worker, sharp-witted and kind, with laugh lines around her eyes that suggested a life well lived. We ended up in a corner discussing affordable housing policy, her passion evident in every gesture. "You actually care," she said at one point. "Most architects I meet are all about aesthetics. You understand these are people's lives." "I learned some things about what matters," I said. "The hard way, but I learned." She tilted her head, curious but not intrusive. "Sounds like there's a story there." "There is, but maybe not a first conversation story." "Fair enough." She'd smiled. "How about a second conversation story?" We'd exchanged numbers. The text came 2 days later. "Coffee?" "I promised to only ask mildly invasive questions about your mysterious past." I'd laughed and said yes. "Our second date?" I told her about Sarah. Not all of it, some wounds were private, but enough that she understood the shape of what I'd been through. Claire had listened without judgment, then shared her own story. An engagement that had ended when she discovered her fiancé's gambling addiction and mountain of debt he'd hidden. We both learned the hard way that love isn't enough, she'd said. Trust, honesty, respect, those aren't optional extras. They're the foundation. And if the foundation is cracked, I'd asked, then you don't build on it. You find new ground. She'd reached across the table, her hand palm up, an offer, not a demand. But that doesn't mean you can't build again. I'd taken her hand, feeling the warmth of human connection, the tentative possibility of something new. Now, standing in the community center with the sound of children's laughter surrounding me, I pulled out my phone and texted Claire, "Want to see the finished project?" "It's pretty great." Her response was immediate. "Pick me up in 20. I want to hear about every decision you made." I smiled, pocketing the phone, taking one last look at the space I'd created. On the wall near the entrance was a dedication plaque. "For those who are building new beginnings." Marcus had asked what I'd meant by that when I'd suggested the inscription. "Everyone who uses this space is creating something," I'd said. "A new skill, a new friendship, a new sense of belonging. That's what second chances look like." He'd approved it, not knowing it was as much for me as for the community. As I walked out into the September sunshine, I realized I no longer checked for emails from unknown senders, no longer wondered if I'd see Sarah on the street, no longer felt that clutch of panic when I saw a woman with her build or hair color. The vigilance had faded. The wound had scarred. I'd never sent those pictures back, had never responded after that final email. Sometimes silence was the most complete sentence. Sarah and William existed somewhere in the world, living their lives, but they existed separately from mine. Parallel lines that had diverged and would never intersect again. And that was okay. More than okay, it was necessary. Claire was waiting outside her apartment when I pulled up, a bouquet of wildflowers in her hand. "For the community center," she explained, climbing in. "Every new beginning deserves flowers, even the messy ones." I asked, "Especially the messy ones?" She leaned over and kissed my cheek. "Those are the ones that actually mean something." As we drove through the city, I thought about the man I'd been 2 years ago, devastated, betrayed, certain his capacity for trust had been permanently destroyed. I'd been wrong about that last part. Trust could be rebuilt, slowly and carefully, with someone who earned it day by day. The last 2 years had taught me that endings weren't failures. Sometimes they were necessary demolitions, clearing space for something better. I'd lost a marriage, but I'd found myself. I'd lost the future I'd planned, but I'd gained the freedom to imagine a better one. Sarah had made her choices, and they'd led to consequences she'd have to live with. David had made his choices, abandoning a child who deserved better. And I'd made mine, to walk away from toxicity, to choose dignity over familiar pain, to believe that I deserved more than scraps of loyalty and love. The divorce hadn't been the end of my story. It had been the end of a chapter I'd outgrown, painful as it was to close the book. Now I was writing new pages, and they were mine, honestly, authentically, courageously mine. As Claire and I pulled up to the community center, I saw Marcus waiting at the entrance with a photographer. He waved enthusiastically, and beside me, Claire laughed. "Ready for your moment of glory?" she asked. "Ready for the next thing," I corrected. "Whatever that is." She took my hand as we got out of the car. "Then let's go find out together." And for the first time in 2 years, when I thought about the future, I felt excitement instead of dread. The past was finally the past, present but not controlling, remembered but not defining. I'd found out she was expecting. I'd walked away when it wasn't mine, and in doing so, I'd given myself the greatest gift, the chance to build a life based on truth rather than convenience, on self-respect rather than sunk costs. Some endings are really beginnings in disguise. Mine had been both, the death of who I'd been and the birth of who I was becoming. And that man, he was going to be just fine,